events of September 11 brought home to Americans the vulnerabilities of our cities to terrorist attack and the threats posed by criminals and terrorists to our fragile infrastructure. Shortly after the September 11 attacks, law enforcement authorities thwarted a group of would-be attackers who were planning to poison the water supply of a Buffalo, New York water treatment facility. Known as the Lackawanna Six, they were arrested, convicted and sent to prison. This was the first indication that terrorists were planning to focus their efforts on our vulnerable water utilities. More than 10 years later, there was another attack on a utility operation, this time in far-off Ukraine, where Russian cybercriminals disabled a large portion of the power grid before the operators were able to restore control. Pivoting to America, sophisticated cyber attacks paralyzed a large part of the electronic computer networks belonging to the cities of Atlanta and Baltimore. The motive was money, and both cities were held for ransom when the cybercriminals blocked access to critical programs involving city finances, government and even police and fire response. The cities had no choice but to pay. In February 2021, another cyber attack targeted a small Florida water treatment plant by temporarily bypassing operator controls and taking over a critical function of the control system, threatening to poison the water treatment process. These are just 4 examples of what former CIA Director Leon Panetta described as the next Pearl Harbor.
The collective result of these kinds of attacks could be a cyber Pearl Harbor. An attack that would cause physical destruction and the loss of life. An attack that would paralyze and shock the nation and create a new profound sense of vulnerability.
As a utility operator or manager, you have a whole host of issues to confront. Threats to water/waste management facilities. CEU Plan has created a series of cybersecurity and assessment courses to assist you in formulating your strategies. Here is instructor Tom Hofer, describing a recent statement from the U.S. government.
According to the Environmental Protection Agency, water utility personnel must contend with interruption of water treatment processes from opening/closing valves. This is exactly what happened at Oldsmar. Overriding alarms or disabling pumps. Damaging system components. Loss of use of SCADA systems. Theft of customer personal or employee data, including financial information. Compromise of the utility email system or theft of passwords.
I've told you some of the threats you face, but who are the people who want to harm your utility? Let's turn to instructor Tom Hofer, a former intelligence office and cybersecurity expert.
In the Oldsmar case, it appears that an individual hacker carried out the attack. But let's not forget terrorist groups, cybercriminal groups and even foreign intelligence services.
You, the utility operator, are the target. Both foreign and domestic hackers are focusing their efforts at penetrating your utility control systems. According to the FBI and Homeland Security, they have already had success. You cannot counter the cyber threats directed against you unless you increase your skill in 2 areas: training and awareness. To defend against cyber attacks, you must identify your vulnerabilities and recognize the threats. Never forget that all computer systems are vulnerable to attack. Vulnerabilities: you know the nature of the threats and the threat actors themselves, but how do you identify your vulnerable areas?
To identify your weaknesses and take measures to counter them, you have to carry out a vulnerability assessment. Federal law, the America's Water Infrastructure Act, requires your utility to do so. Here are some basic questions you should be asking as you consider your utility's possible vulnerabilities. One of the most important issues is the identification of single points of failure, system weaknesses that can bring down an entire system.
Let's briefly examine what possibly happened in the Oldsmar cyber attack. Instructor Tom Hofer describes how an attack like this is structured.
The man-in-the-middle attack occurs when the attacker positions herself between a workstation or a client and the server. The most common form of this attack, also called session hijacking, occurs when an attacker successfully substitutes her IP address for the legitimate client, while the victimized server continues to connect with what appears to be a legitimate user. This is a very easy way to insert malware into a system, since the server believes it is dealing with an authorized user. This type of attack is a direct threat to utility professionals.
And this graphic used by the EPA in its 2018 warning to the utility industry is what a hacker sees when he successfully penetrates a water utility SCADA system. The Oldsmar incident could have been prevented if the system had been periodically updated and patched. This is the kind of information you will encounter in the Vulnerabilities series. There are no shortcuts to cybersecurity. Take these challenges head-on by providing realistic and up-to-date training to your operators and utility leaders. Risk assessments are grounded in the family of the International Standards Organization, CEU Plan. Instructor Tom Hofer explains.
There are some real advantages to using the ISO family of risk management in your water utility risk assessment process. You can rely on a common set of definitions as well as an uncomplicated risk assessment process which uses a 4-step cycle: plan, do, check, and act. You will be able to use a common methodology for conducting risk assessments, and your results will have clearly defined risk treatment options that you can put into practice.